Millionaire CEO stood in the hospital when a little girl asked, "Where can I buy a heart for my mom?" What she handed him next shattered everything he thought he knew. What happens when the man who built machines to keep others alive must finally grow a heart of his own? If you're watching this from anywhere in the world, tell us where in the comments. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let's begin. Cole Harrington stood at the front desk of St. Joseph's Medical Center, his tailored navy coat clinging neatly to his broad frame as he tapped his fingers against the marble countertop in a rhythm that betrayed his restlessness. The hospital smelled of antiseptic, and something else he could never quite name, maybe fatigue or fear, or the slow decay of hope. He had come here expecting a routine audit. Harrington Biotech's charitable arm had recently funded a multi-million-dollar pediatric wing, and this visit was supposed to be nothing more than a goodwill gesture, a brief walkthrough before returning to a boardroom 10 floors above reality. But nothing about this morning felt routine. The receptionist was typing slowly, distractedly, her long acrylic nails clacking softly against the keyboard. Cole checked his watch, even though he had nowhere to be for the next 30 minutes. Behind him, nurses moved swiftly through the corridor, pushing machines that beeped softly and whispered in mechanical rhythm. Laughter from the pediatric wing spilled faintly down the hallway, sweet and jarring against the stillness of the lobby. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat for his phone and began scrolling through a queue of unread emails, none of them urgent, all of them designed to pull him away from the moment. His eyes flicked back to the lobby entrance, then the elevator bank, then back to the receptionist. He was about to leave when he felt it, a tug on the sleeve of his coat. Small, hesitant. He turned slowly. A little girl stood beside him. She could not have been more than 6 years old, wearing a faded pink dress and a pair of oversized sneakers that didn't match. Her braids were uneven and fraying at the edges, and in her hand she clutched a crumpled $5 bill like it was the only thing she had in the world. She looked up at him, her face solemn and sincere, her voice barely louder than a breath. "Mister, do you know where I can buy a heart for my mom?" Cole blinked. For a second, the words did not compute. Not because he hadn't heard them, but because they struck so deeply, so unexpectedly, that his brain stalled under the weight of them. He stared at the girl. Her eyes were large and dark, and so serious they made his own vision blur. Her grip on the bill tightened, and he saw now that her knuckles were scraped the skin over one knee, bandaged in a makeshift wrap of gauze and cartoon stickers. Her shoes were wet from a puddle she must have stepped in, and her dress was at least 2 sizes too small. He crouched down slowly, instinctively, suddenly aware of how tall he must have looked from her view. "What did you say, sweetheart?" She didn't flinch. Her gaze remained steady. "I want to buy a heart. For my mom. She's really tired and they said she needs a new one. I have $5. I saved it from my birthday." Cole's throat closed around a lump he hadn't realized was there. He opened his mouth, closed it again. His hand moved without thinking, gently covering hers. "You don't have to buy anything," he said softly. "Maybe I can help you. Can you take me to her?" The girl nodded, serious and silent, then turned and began walking. Cole followed, leaving his phone, his schedule, and his sense of control behind. His polished shoes echoed too loudly against the tile floor. They passed rows of chairs, a mural of painted handprints on the pediatric wing wall, and a nurse who looked up and briefly made eye contact with Cole before quickly looking away, recognition flickering across her face. The girl stopped in front of a door that stood half open. Inside, the lights were dimmed. A heart monitor beeped in slow intervals. A woman lay on the bed, still as stone, her chest rising and falling beneath the thin hospital blanket. Her hair was longer now and her frame thinner than he remembered, but when Cole saw her face, he stopped breathing. Elena. The name crashed through him like a breaking tide. His knees nearly buckled, but he gripped the doorframe and stayed upright. Her lips were pale. Her skin had lost its warmth. The tubes curled from her arms like vines. Her eyes were closed, lashes fluttering faintly, a sign of fragile consciousness, or the body trying to hold on. And standing beside her with that $5 bill still in her hand was a little girl who looked nothing like him, and everything like her. The child turned to him and spoke again, this time softer. "Mommy says not to worry. but I think she's scared." Cole didn't speak. Couldn't. Everything inside him was in free fall. 7 years ago, Elena Rios had been his most trusted assistant, smart and sharp and full of quiet humor. She had joined his company during its explosive second year and had become indispensable in ways he never fully admitted. She had also been the first and last person who ever told him he was becoming someone he once promised he would never be. Then one day she was gone. Fired for financial misconduct, escorted from the building with her box of belongings and a security badge she never even got to return. The evidence had seemed irrefutable. Her login credentials used to siphon money from a discretionary development fund, her name on the transfer records. Cole had believed it, not because he wanted to, but because he had needed to keep the company clean. He had not even asked to speak to her. He had simply signed the order and moved on. Now she lay in front of him in a public hospital under a false name, and the girl beside her was asking strangers to buy a new heart. His mind reeled. He turned to the little girl. "What's your name?" "Maya," she said, "like the artist Mommy says." Cole nodded slowly, trying to stay anchored. "Maya, that's a beautiful name." The girl tilted her head. "You're a nice man, but you look sad." He smiled barely. "I think you're very smart." She nodded once, as if that was already obvious. "Do you know a doctor?" He nodded again. "I know a few. Let me talk to one of them, okay?" She looked at him as if weighing whether to trust him, then slowly sat in the chair beside the bed, reaching for her mother's limp hand. Cole stepped out into the hallway and inhaled like he was surfacing from underwater. He found a nurse, asked for the attending physician, and was led to a consultation room with peeling linoleum and a coffee machine that had long since stopped working. A few minutes later, a man in his late 40s entered, wearing a white coat and a tired expression. "I'm Dr. Levin. You were with Maya just now." Cole extended a hand. "Cole Harrington." The man raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "What's her mother's condition?" The doctor sighed and sat. The patient listed as Elena Mendez was admitted 2 weeks ago with advanced dilated cardiomyopathy. She collapsed at a bus stop. No ID. It took us 3 days to match her to a record from 7 years ago. She refused to call anyone. She's in end-stage heart failure. Without a transplant, she has at most 2 weeks, less if her vitals keep declining. Cole swallowed. Why isn't she on the transplant list? She has a rare blood type. AB negative. And no insurance, no primary care, no family on record. We filed her for emergency review, but the system is slow. Even if a donor comes through, the compatibility process takes time. And we don't have time. Cole rubbed his forehead. What if I paid for a private jet, had her transferred? The doctor shook his head. It's not about money, Mr. Harrington. It's about logistics. She's too weak to be moved unless she's stabilized. And we're doing everything we can. Cole nodded. Can I see her chart? The doctor looked skeptical. Are you family? Cole's voice was quiet. I was once someone who should have known. Please. After a pause, the doctor slid a folder across the table. Cole opened it and saw numbers, blood panels, charts. He didn't understand most of it. But what he did understand was that the woman who had once looked at him with a fire that melted through every cold ambition he ever had was dying, and a little girl was sitting beside her drawing pictures on napkins and trying to save her with birthday money. He handed the folder back. Thank you. One more question. The girl Maya, is she Elena's daughter? The doctor nodded. That's what she told the admitting nurse. But we haven't verified any paternal connection. Cole nodded once. His chest ached. Something inside him shifted, almost broke, but didn't. Not yet. He returned to the room and found Maya asleep in the chair, her head resting against her mother's side. One small hand still holding the crumpled bill. He knelt beside her, brushed a loose braid behind her ear, and whispered, I'm going to help your mom. I promise. She didn't stir, but her fingers twitched just slightly, as if she heard him anyway. Cole stood, reached into his coat pocket, and pulled out his phone. Not for emails, not for business, for answers. Because whatever happened next, it began here, Not in a boardroom, not in a laboratory, not in a press release. It began with a little girl, a failing heart, and a mistake he had made 7 years ago that was no longer content to stay buried. Cole Harrington sat in the back seat of his town car, the city blurring past the window like watercolor left in the rain. The driver said nothing used to his silence, but this time the silence was different. It wasn't composed or powerful. It was gutted. Cole kept his eyes on the buildings rolling by, none of them staying in focus long enough to matter. Everything that had once made sense to him, everything built with years of ruthless discipline and precision, now felt like static in the background of a single question that refused to leave his mind. How had he let her vanish? Not just from his company, but from the entire map of his life. Elena Rios. Her name had barely been spoken in 7 years. Not since the day she had been escorted from the Harrington Biotech headquarters, a silent figure in a dark coat carrying a cardboard box, her eyes unreadable. He had not asked questions. He had not doubted the reports. It had all seemed clean, clinical. Her login used to authorize a funds transfer, her access history matching the exact time the money disappeared from an experimental development account. And yet now, after what he had seen in that hospital room, nothing about it felt right. Not the way she had been dismissed. Not the way the investigation had been closed so quickly. Not the way Graham Voss, his chief operating officer, had handled it all with such smooth efficiency. Elena had always been careful, ethical to a fault. She used to challenge him in meetings quietly but firmly whenever a budget decision cut too close to their mission. She once refused a bonus because it had been approved without review. That was not a woman who would steal. And yet he had let her fall without asking why. His jaw clenched as the car turned onto the expressway, heading toward his penthouse tower, a structure of steel and glass that now felt as hollow as he did. He leaned back against the headrest and closed his eyes. Her face floated behind them, pale, drawn, unconscious lips tinged with blue. And Maya. That name, small and bright and painful, echoed louder than anything else. A child too young to understand betrayal, too brave to let it stop her. She had looked at him with quiet trust, not because he had earned it, but because she had no one else to ask. The words had struck him harder than any boardroom ambush he had ever faced. Where can I buy a heart for my mom? He had built a billion-dollar company around the idea of fixing broken hearts. His medical devices had reduced recovery times, revolutionized early detection, saved thousands of lives. But he had never thought the technology would come face-to-face with someone like Maya, clutching a crumpled $5 bill and begging for a miracle. Back at his penthouse, the doorman opened the lobby doors and greeted him with a nod. Cole barely registered it. He walked through the marble atrium, past a fountain he once designed to impress foreign investors, and stepped into the private elevator. As the doors closed and the car began its smooth ascent, he pulled out his phone and opened his encrypted archives. 7 years ago. He scrolled to the internal audit report, the investigation summary, the statement from Graham. He reread every line. The fund in question had been small, a discretionary grant, tied to a prototype that never left the concept phase. Elena had been one of 4 people with access, but her credentials had authorized the transfers. Graham's summary had stated it plainly. Evidence overwhelming. Elena Rios terminated. No appeal filed. Case closed. Cole stared at the words. Something about them no longer fit. His gut, trained by decades of high-stakes negotiations and courtroom arbitrations, was suddenly screaming the one thing it never screamed without reason. You missed something. His penthouse door slid open silently. The space inside was immaculate, curated, soulless. Glass walls, stone counters, steel fixtures. A design magazine's dream and a human's nightmare. He dropped his keys on the marble counter and walked to the bar, pouring himself a glass of water he didn't drink. His hands were shaking just enough to notice. In the corner of the living room stood a prototype of one of the company's earliest devices, a cardio-mapping hologram interface. He had once called it the future. Now it blinked quietly in the dark like a heartbeat waiting for direction. Cole turned away from it and walked to the massive bookshelf behind his desk. It held awards, patents, a photo of his late father, and a small ceramic dish. He opened the dish and took out a folded slip of paper. It was a note Elena had once written on a post-it, back when the company was still in its first office, crowded with folding chairs and half-working coffee machines. You skipped breakfast again. This doesn't count as fuel. Beside it, she had drawn a frowning cup of coffee holding a protest sign. He had kept it all these years, buried it. Now it felt like evidence. He sat at his desk and began composing an email to a private security analyst he trusted more than his own board. Subject line 7-year audit review, confidential. He attached the documents, marked them for priority. Then he leaned back and stared at the ceiling. A thought surfaced and he sat forward again, opening a secure app and scrolling to the patent filing history for Project Echo. That was the code name for the synthetic heart chamber model that never made it past early sketches. He had shelved it 5 years ago. The interface had been too expensive for mass production, and the FDA had stonewalled its testing. He had not spoken about Project Echo publicly in years. And yet Maya had shown him a drawing. A rough but eerily accurate sketch of a heart, with stabilizing rings and a node-like structure around a central pulse point. Only 3 engineers and 2 executives had ever seen those drafts. One of them had been Elena. That was not coincidence. That was memory. That was legacy. He looked at the sketch again, scanned into his phone from the napkin Maya had left behind. There were tiny letters in the corner, almost invisible. M plus E equals strong. His heart twisted in his chest. He didn't know what kind of relationship Elena had tried to build for Maya, whether she had told her stories of science or survival, whether she had spoken of him at all, but somehow the pieces were connecting. Maya's mother had not disappeared. She had been erased, pushed out, silenced, and Cole had let it happen. That realization, more than anything else, broke something in him. He stood and paced the room, his thoughts racing. Graham had always been efficient, loyal to a fault, a master of optics and clean exits. He was also the man who had first flagged Elena's access logs, who had insisted the matter be handled quietly to avoid scandal. Cole had agreed. Back then he was trying to close a major partnership with a European cardiac device distributor. He remembered it now. Graham had warned that public scandal could spook the investors. They couldn't afford the noise. Cole had nodded, distracted, grateful someone else was cleaning up the mess. He had signed the termination without even reviewing the server logs himself. That was the mistake. Not just trusting Graham, but abandoning the woman who had once stayed late to help him rehearse his pitch to the FDA, who had brought soup when he was sick and made him laugh in the middle of budget season. He had not just fired her. He had vanished her. And now she was dying in a hospital bed, still too proud to call for help. Cole grabbed his coat. He didn't know where he was going yet, but he could not stay here. Not with these walls, not with that silence. He took the elevator down, his reflection pale and distant in the mirrored panel. Outside, the night had grown cool. He got into the back of his car again and gave the driver a name. St. Joseph's Medical Center. Again, sir, the driver asked carefully. Yes, Cole said. Again. He arrived 20 minutes later. The lobby was quieter now. Lights dimmed, staff rotating into night shift. He walked through the hallway, his shoes silent this time, memory guiding him until he reached the door to Elena's room. Maya was asleep again in the same chair, her head resting against her mother's arm. A new drawing had been taped to the wall. It showed a man, a woman, and a child standing beneath a large heart. The man wore a tie. The child had braids. The woman's eyes were closed, but there was a faint smile on her drawn face. Cole sat in the extra chair beside the bed and watched Elena breathe. Her face was still pale. The heart monitor beeped faintly, its rhythm slower than before. He reached out and gently placed his hand over hers. I don't know if you can hear me, he whispered, but I'm sorry. For everything. For not asking. For believing what I wanted to believe. I should have looked for you. I should have known something wasn't right. He paused, swallowing the lump rising in his throat. Maya is incredible. You did that. You raised her with nothing and gave her everything. I don't know if I deserve to be here, but I'm going to stay. I'm going to fight, not just for you, for her, for the truth. He sat there for hours, Eventually, a nurse offered him a blanket. He didn't sleep. He just watched the monitors and held her hand and waited. Not for forgiveness, just for a second chance. And in that long, quiet night, Cole Harrington finally began to understand that building something powerful wasn't the same as building something right. And what he had broken might never be fully repaired. But it was time to try. Cole Harrington stood at the window of his office the next morning, watching the fog roll in from the west like a silent curtain draping itself over the skyline. The sun had not broken through yet, and the glass tower around him felt colder than usual, more sterile, as if it too sensed that something had shifted. He had arrived before anyone else, slipping through the private elevator just after 5, and had spent the last 2 hours reviewing files from 7 years ago that no longer made sense in the light of what he now knew. Elena's termination report, the flagged server logs, the transfer records, they all read like a clean-cut case on the surface, but now they felt curated, rehearsed. He kept returning to the same 3 details. 1, the funds were rerouted through an internal holding account that was later shut down. 2, the internal compliance officer who had signed off on the closure left the company 6 months after. And 3, the only person who seemed to benefit from the disappearance of that money was the one who insisted Elena be removed with as little noise as possible. Graham Voss, Cole's right hand, the man who had helped scale Harrington Biotech into a global empire, a fixture at every board meeting, every investor dinner, every strategic retreat, and now possibly the architect of the worst mistake Cole had ever made. He ran a hand through his hair and stepped away from the window. On his desk were 2 folders. One contained the hospital documents he had collected the night before, the other a manila envelope from the private security analyst he had hired just 12 hours ago. The name on the tab read, Internal Audit Reconstruction Confidential. Cole opened it and scanned the preliminary findings. The transferred data from 7 years ago had originated from Elena's credentials, yes. But what stood out now was the IP history. At the exact time of the transaction, Elena's login was traced to a terminal located in a room she had never been assigned to, a conference space on the executive floor. According to badge data, she had not even entered that floor that day, but someone else had. Graham. Not directly, of course. That would have been too obvious. But a junior analyst working under Graham had accessed the room. That analyst had later been promoted to a satellite office in Singapore out of reach. Cole exhaled slowly, the realization tightening his chest. Someone had used Elena's login credentials from a different machine in a place she had no access to, and no one questioned it because no one had been looking. Except now he was. He picked up his phone and dialed a secure line. When it rang, he pressed it to his ear. I want a full forensic trace of every fund movement through discretionary budgets between year 4 and year 6. I want timestamps, IPs, badge logs. Everything. The voice on the other end hesitated. That's a massive volume of data, sir. Then start now. You have 48 hours. He hung up without waiting for a response. Cole turned and looked at the framed photos on the far wall. Awards. Magazine covers. A picture of him standing beside a medical device that had changed thousands of lives. He had been called visionary. Brilliant. The youngest biotech CEO to reach the 1 billion mark. And yet, none of those headlines mentioned the people who disappeared along the way. People like Elena. He sat at his desk and opened his laptop, beginning a new document. Not a press release, not a product roadmap. A list. At the top, he typed Elena's name. Underneath, he wrote date of termination, flagged logins, IP address conflict, no formal appeal, confidential case closure. Then he added Maya, the girl, her age, her sketch of Project Echo, her presence beside a woman who had been left to carry the weight of someone else's crime. He thought of her again, sitting beside that bed, her braids undone and her eyes filled with more quiet bravery than he had ever seen in a boardroom. It wasn't just guilt now, it was fury. Not only had Elena been wronged, but the company had continued forward as if her life had never mattered. As if she had been a replaceable gear in a machine too important to stop. Cole closed the laptop and stood. His assistant knocked once and stepped into the room holding a tablet. Mr. Harrington, Graham asked if you had a few minutes this morning. He said it's about the Q3 projections and the investor call. Cole nodded. Send him in. The door closed, and a moment later Graham Voss entered the office dressed in his usual muted tones, every hair in place. He moved like a man who had never doubted his authority. Cole watched him with new eyes, now not speaking until Graham had taken a seat across the desk. Q3 projections can wait, Cole said. I want to talk about Elena Rios. Graham blinked just once, then adjusted his cuffs. That's a name I haven't heard in years. Why? Because I saw her yesterday, in a hospital. Intensive care. She's dying of heart failure. Graham's expression didn't change, but something in his posture stiffened. That's unfortunate, he said, but I'm not sure why it concerns us now. That matter was resolved a long time ago. She was stealing from us. That's what the records say. But the records were curated, weren't they? Graham's eyes narrowed slightly. I'm not following. You flagged her, didn't you? You initiated the audit. You sent the report to compliance. Graham leaned back. I followed protocol. The data was clear. Then why does the login trace back to a terminal she never accessed? Why does the badge data contradict the timestamp? Why is the analyst who logged in now working in Singapore under a title she never applied for? Graham's jaw flexed. That data was vetted. It was your signature on the termination. And it was your hand that gave me the pen. Cole stood. I trusted you. I believed you. And now I find the woman we destroyed barely breathing in a hospital bed while her daughter tries to buy her a new heart with $5. Graham stood too, a beat slower. His voice dropped. Be careful, Cole. We built this company together. Don't start tearing it down because of a ghost from your past. That ghost is the reason I can't sleep at night, and that little girl might be the only decent thing that ever came out of this place. Graham's face hardened. What do you want from me? A confession. I want the truth. I want your resignation. And I want you gone before the end of the day. You can sign the papers quietly, or I will drag every piece of this into the light and let the board decide. Graham stared at him. Then he smiled faintly. You always had a soft spot for lost causes. But you forget this company runs on silence and momentum. You slow it down and it will eat you. Cole stepped forward. Cole, let it. I'd rather burn it down and start over than let it keep devouring people like Elena. The silence between them was sharp enough to cut air. Then Graham turned and walked out. No words. No denials. Just the calm of a man who had known this day might come. Cole sat down again, exhausted. He stared at the photo of the prototype on his wall, then reached into his desk drawer and pulled out the napkin Maya had left. The drawing, the heart, the equation in the corner. M plus E equals strong. He placed it on his desk beside his laptop and opened a new tab. He began drafting a letter to the hospital requesting legal permission to be added to Elena's medical decisions. Then he began another to a transplant liaison he had worked with during the early days of their cardiac division. He was no longer just fixing a mistake. He was trying to rebuild something sacred, not a company, not a brand, a family that had almost been lost forever, and he would not let it slip away again. Not now, not when there was still a single beat left to save. The next 48 hours unfolded in a blur of signatures, phone calls, and sleepless determination as Cole Harrington threw the full weight of his influence into a battle that no longer felt corporate, but deeply personal. He had submitted the emergency guardianship paperwork that morning, and by late afternoon, a county judge had granted him temporary medical proxy over Elena's case, citing both the urgency of her condition and the lack of available family. He had been careful with every word of his filing, not revealing the full extent of their past, not yet only stating that he was a known associate with medical and financial ability to assist. But the truth weighed on every decision he made, and it beat like a second pulse behind every step he took. By the time he arrived back at St. Joseph's, the hospital staff no longer looked at him like a stranger. The head nurse nodded when he passed the security guard, opened the restricted wing without hesitation, and Dr. Levin met him outside Elena's room with an exhausted expression, but a trace more hope than the day before. She is stable, the doctor said in a low voice, gesturing toward the monitors. We've managed to prevent further deterioration for now. Her vitals are holding with the current medication combination, but that's all we can do until we get a match. Cole looked past him through the glass panel where Elena lay pale and motionless. Her lips were still dry. Her chest rose and fell in shallow rhythm under the sheet. The machine beside her let out a soft, steady pulse, a synthetic metronome that reminded Cole just how thin the thread was that still tied her to this world. What about the list, he asked. Is she registered yet? Dr. Levin exhaled and pulled a folded printout from the pocket of his coat. We submitted her to the National Transplant Network yesterday. Her blood type is AB negative. That's the rarest there is. Less than 1% of the population. Even if we find a compatible donor, her body might reject the transplant. And without a match in the next 10 days, she won't survive. Cole took the paper and stared at the numbers. It was not just a list. It was a death clock. His eyes narrowed. What about the European databases, the private registries? I've already contacted Zurich, Vienna, and the Helsinki Institute. They're checking their registries, but even if we found someone tonight, it would take time to transport the organ match, the tissue schedule surgery, and that assumes there's no border red tape. Cole's jaw clenched. Time was the one currency he had never learned how to earn. Then he looked up. What about biosynthetics? Experimental implants? I know we're years out from approval in the States, but the Zurich Biomedical Institute was running something on pulse-reactive hybrid chambers last year. Dr. Levin hesitated. That project has not cleared Phase 3 trials. Only 5 patients have received the implant. 2 didn't survive. It's high risk. They'd need to perform the procedure under absolute precision, and Elena's condition puts her at the edge of eligibility. Cole's mind raced. He knew this field better than anyone. His own company had shelved a similar project 4 years ago when FDA delays threatened their lead device rollouts. Project Echo. The artificial heart that had once promised to change the game, but was deemed too radical for the risk-averse industry. But Zurich had picked it up. Or at least something like it. He remembered now. One of his former engineers had gone to Europe and joined the team. Her name was Dr. Matthias Engel. He had not spoken to her in years, but remembered her brilliance and her stubborn commitment to saving lives over following protocol. I need a number, Cole said. I want to speak to Engel directly. Dr. Levin raised an eyebrow. And what will you say to her? That I have a patient who might be your 6th success. That I will fund the entire unit's research for the next 3 years if you take her. That I will fly her across the world in a surgical-grade jet with a mobile ICU team if it means we get one more chance. The doctor did not respond for a moment. Then he gave a slow nod and turned toward his station. Cole stayed behind his gaze, drifting back to Elena's room. Maya was in the chair again, legs tucked underneath her, quietly coloring on the back of a printed hospital flyer. She looked up when she saw him and smiled just a little, like someone who had learned to ration hope the way other people rationed food. He walked in and sat beside her. She didn't ask any questions, but her eyes stayed on him as if silently trying to read what kind of day it was. He reached into his pocket and handed her a fresh box of crayons. Not the broken ones the hospital stocked, but a full set, every color sharp and untouched. Her eyes lit up. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded. "Can I see what you were drawing?" She turned the page toward him. It was another picture of the 3 of them standing on a hill with a sun in the sky and a big red heart floating above their heads. Only this time, the heart had wires and tiny circles drawn inside it like a machine. He pointed to it. "What's that part?" She tapped it. "That's the part that keeps it going when you're tired. Mommy says everyone has a part like that, even if they don't know it." Cole stared at the drawing, unable to speak for a moment. He cleared his throat. "I think your mom would be very proud of that." Maya smiled again and went back to coloring. He stayed beside her until a nurse came in to check Elena's vitals. Then he stood and walked out to take the call that had just come through from Zurich. Dr. Engel's voice was crisp, direct, and carried a familiar edge of irritation until she heard who was on the line. Then came a pause. "I read about your company's last quarterly milestone," she said. "Impressive. but I assume this isn't a courtesy call." "It's not," Cole said. "I have a patient. Name is Elena Rios. End-stage heart failure. AB negative, uninsured, minimal support. But she's a fighter, and she's awake." Engel was silent for a moment. "That doesn't meet our trial qualifications," I know, Cole said. "But I also know you pushed for the edge cases. I read your article on post-failure resilience rates in non-ideal subjects. This is your chance to prove the theory." Her voice softened just slightly. "Where is she now?" "Los Angeles. I can have her in Zurich within 36 hours if you greenlight the intake. You'll need to clear a dozen permits. You'll need a surgical-grade transport and a mobile team certified in transition cardiac care. I'll handle all of it. I'll pay for it. I'll even sponsor the next 10 patients in your trial if it helps." Engel exhaled. "You really think she can make it?" "I do," Cole said. "But she won't without you?" There was a long silence. Then Engel spoke. "Send me her records tonight. If the vitals look survivable, we prep a slot." Cole thanked her and ended the call. He returned to the hospital room and found Maya still coloring. He crouched beside her and said softly, "We might be able to help your mom, but it means taking her far away, to a place with very special doctors." Maya looked up. "Will you come too?" "Of course," he said. "We'll both go. Together." She nodded like that made sense and pulled out another sheet of paper. This time she began drawing an airplane with 3 figures inside. She didn't ask for details. She just believed. That night, Cole arranged for the most advanced medical jet in the Western Hemisphere to be prepared. He hired a mobile ICU team, filed for emergency transit visas, and contacted the Swiss consulate. His legal team began processing temporary guardianship extensions and prepared Elena's records for international review. By morning, the hospital had assigned a lead nurse to begin prepping her for flight. Time was still against them, but now at least they had a direction. They had movement. Cole sat beside Elena's bed as the sun rose, his hand resting gently over hers, whispering to her that they were not done, that her daughter was waiting, that he was not leaving this time. And for the first time since all of this began, he felt something new stir inside him. Not hope. Not yet. But determination sharp enough to slice through despair. They had one shot, and he was going to take it. They left just after dawn 2 days later, the tarmac at the private airfield still glistening with dew, as the Harrington chartered medical jet hummed to life. Cole stood beside the stretcher, watching as the medical team secured Elena for flight, the soft hiss of the oxygen feed, and the steady blinking of the portable monitor echoing louder than any engine roar. Maya held his hand tightly, her small fingers wrapped around his thumb like it was the only thing tethering her to the world. She had not cried once. Not when they moved her mother onto the jet, not when the medical staff explained the risks, not even when they lifted off into the clouds and California shrank beneath them. She sat beside him quietly in the cream leather seat, her drawing pad in her lap, sketching shapes that looked more and more like blueprints than pictures. The window beside her was fogged with altitude, but she didn't look outside. She only glanced occasionally toward her mother, who lay unconscious across the aisle, watched over by 2 critical care nurses and a cardiac surgeon on standby. Cole found himself checking Elena's vitals every few minutes, not because he was medically needed, but because he couldn't stop. It was his guilt manifesting, as vigilance, his past mistakes clawing at the present in the form of an electronic monitor. He had promised Maya they would fix this, and now every flicker of her mother's oxygen levels felt like a silent judgment. Maya finally looked up at him halfway through the flight. Her voice was so quiet he almost missed it over the hum of the cabin. "Did you like my mommy?" Cole's breath caught, but he didn't let it show. He nodded. "Very much. She used to help me, at work." Maya studied him. "Did you help her back?" He stared out the window for a long time before answering. "I should have. I didn't." Maya looked down. "Mommy said some people are like mirrors. They only show what's inside you, but if you're scared, they show you that too." Cole swallowed hard. "What do you think she showed me? That you were kind, but maybe you forgot." He couldn't respond. His throat tightened and the words died before they could reach his mouth. She went back to drawing. When the jet touched down in Zurich, it was raining a light mist that coated the windows in silver droplets. 2 ambulances waited on the runway, flanked by security and a liaison from the Zurich Biomedical Institute. Elena was moved with clinical precision from jet to ambulance, monitored every second by the mobile ICU team that had flown with them. Cole rode in the second vehicle with Maya, who pressed her forehead to the rain-slick window and whispered, "It looks like water is crying from the sky." He reached into his coat pocket and handed her a new notebook. This one leather-bound something he had picked up in the Zurich airport years ago and never used. It had golden edges and thick paper. She opened it gently like it was something sacred and began sketching immediately. They arrived at the institute and were guided through glass corridors that felt more like a science museum than a hospital. Doctors in clean white coats, researchers behind double-paned windows, biometric scanners at every door. It was the future Cole once believed he was building, now existing without him. Dr. Engel met them in the surgical prep wing, her silver hair tied back, sharp eyes scanning Elena's vitals. She gave no pleasantries, just nodded once and said, "We begin stabilization now. Transplant window in 36 hours. She looked at Cole. "This is going to hurt. For everyone." Cole nodded. "Just save her." That night, they were given a guest suite on the upper floor of the research center. Maya fell asleep clutching her drawing pad beside a large window overlooking the quiet city below. Cole didn't sleep. He sat beside the bed with his phone in hand, scrolling through old emails, archived footage, anything related to the day Elena was fired. Something still did not sit right. Her login timestamp the night of the incident had been flagged at 2 a.m, but he remembered speaking to her just after midnight. Her tone had been urgent. She had asked for more time to verify some inconsistencies in the procurement ledger. Then she was gone. The internal audit team led by Graham Voss had claimed the missing funds were traced back to her credentials. The trail had ended in a deleted server, a few signed forms, and a board decision to dismiss her with legal restraint. Cole had not questioned it then. He had trusted the process. But now, watching Elena fight for her life and seeing her daughter asleep in a foreign hospital because of a choice he made, that blind trust curdled into something else. At 5 a.m, Zurich time, he made the call. His chief legal counsel, Olivia Brandt, answered groggily from New York. He told her to reopen the entire Voss-led audit from 7 years ago. No summaries, no redacted memos. He wanted the raw logs, the original transaction trails, the signed reports, and he wanted a forensic analyst on it by noon. Olivia did not argue. By the time Cole returned to the surgical wing later that morning, Dr. Engel had already begun the pre-op procedure. Elena was awake but groggy, her eyes fluttering open beneath a curtain of medical light. He stepped into the observation room where Maya sat with a nurse, legs swinging over the edge of the chair. She looked up at him. "Is she better yet?" He shook his head gently. "Not yet. But soon." "Can I draw something for her?" "Of course. What should I draw?" Cole paused. "Something that shows her what's waiting when she wakes up." Maya nodded and turned back to the page. The image she drew was simple: a sun, a big tree, a bench, 3 people sitting together beneath it, and in the sky a heart with wings. He watched her sketch and wondered how a child could carry so much weight in so few lines. Later that day, when Dr. Engel called him into the sterile conference room, her face was unreadable. She placed a tablet on the table displaying Elena's latest compatibility scores. She qualifies for the implant, but barely. "This will be the most complex operation of my career." But she is lucid and signed the consent. She wants to live. Cole nodded. "Then let's give her that chance." Engel leaned forward. "You know she mentioned you. Said you were the reason she stayed strong this long. That she hoped you'd forgive yourself one day." He blinked. "She said that." Engel nodded. "Right before we sedated her. I've seen hundreds of patients. Not many use their last words before surgery to talk about someone else's peace. You should think about that." That afternoon, the surgery began. Cole sat beside Maya in the waiting room. Every hour that passed, he updated her gently. "They've begun. They're stabilizing her. The implant is going in. They're watching her heart now. Maya never asked for timelines. Only once did she speak, and it was to say, "If she wakes up, can I tell her something first?" "Yes," he said. "Whatever you want." Evening came, then midnight, then silence. At 2 in the morning, Dr. Engel entered the room, her mask pulled down, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. She sat across from them and said quietly, "She made it. The implant is stable. She's asleep now, but she made it." Cole exhaled for the first time in hours. He turned to Maya, who simply smiled and whispered, "I knew she would." They went to see her the next morning. Elena was pale, still weak but alive. Her fingers twitched when Maya placed her hand over them. Her lips moved when Cole whispered, "I'm here. You're safe. You're home." And when Maya leaned in and whispered whatever secret message she had saved for that moment, a single tear slid down Elena's cheek. And that was enough. Enough to know they had not come all this way for nothing. Enough to know that even guilt could not keep love from finding its way back. Enough to believe that maybe, just maybe, they were not broken beyond repair. And as Cole sat between mother and daughter, watching their breath sink in quiet rhythm, he realized something he had not been ready to admit before. He was no longer running from the past. He was walking straight into it, determined to rewrite it. One breath, one heartbeat, one second chance at a time. 3 days after the surgery, Zurich was cloaked in a quiet snowfall that turned the hospital courtyard into a blanket of white, softening the edges of a world that had recently been so sharp. Cole stood beside the window of Elena's recovery room, watching flakes drift past the glass like tiny parachutes, each one falling without resistance, as if the world had finally learned how to be gentle. Elena was awake, sitting up slowly for the first time, her skin still pale, but with a blush of warmth that hadn't been there since California. Her eyes tracked the snow for a long time before they shifted to Maya, who sat cross-legged in the corner, sketching a strange hybrid of a rocket and a treehouse. Elena smiled faintly, and then turned to Cole. "Is that what I think it is?" He crossed the room and looked down at the drawing. "That is Maya's future company headquarters. I believe it has both a launch pad and a swing set." Elena chuckled, her voice rough but alive. "She's always been that way. She sees things as they should be, not as they are." Cole met her eyes, and for a long moment neither spoke. Then he asked quietly, "Why didn't you tell me? That she was mine?" Elena blinked slowly, the words arriving like cautious guests. "Because I didn't know. I suspected. But then, everything happened so fast. The accusations, the dismissal. I was terrified, Cole. Not of being a mother, of being erased. And if I was wrong about her father, I didn't want to tie her to a lie." Cole sat in the chair beside her bed, his elbows on his knees. "I let them destroy you. I didn't even ask questions. I signed off on the investigation like it was routine. Like you were a line item." Elena looked down. "I never blamed you. You were under pressure. You trusted the people who brought you the facts. The betrayal wasn't that you believed them. It was that no one ever asked why I would do something like that in the first place." Cole nodded slowly. "I'm reopening the case. My legal team is pulling the original logs, the audit trails, everything. I won't let it rest." Elena's expression shifted. "Be careful. They won't like that." "Who's they?" "You already know. You're just afraid to admit it." Cole sat back, the sting of her words softened by their truth. He had known. Somewhere deep down he had always known that Graham Voss, the executive vice president of global strategy, had risen too fast. That his clean hands were always someone else's dirty work. Cole's phone buzzed on the table beside the bed. He picked it up and saw a message from Olivia, his counsel. Initial findings confirm inconsistency. Elena's credentials accessed from offsite server. Possible backdoor key used. Voss flagged. Cole stared at the screen, heart pounding. Elena watched him carefully. "That's why I left. Not just to protect Maya, but because I knew if I stayed, I'd become a story in their narrative. They'd make it look like you saved me out of guilt. not love, and they'd use that to manipulate you, and maybe even her. He looked up. They're not going to manipulate anyone anymore. Not you, not her, not me. A week later, they flew back to California. Maya insisted on sitting beside the window, her new sketchbook already half filled with ideas for a floating hospital that also doubled as an art gallery. Elena was strong enough to walk short distances now, and when she stepped off the plane into the cool California morning, she tilted her face toward the sun and smiled. I didn't think I'd see this again. Cole stayed close to both of them, no longer as an outsider, stepping carefully into their orbit, but as someone who had quietly decided to build his life around them. When they arrived at the Harrington estate, Maya gasped at the sight of the lake behind the house, frozen at the edges but sparkling in the afternoon light. Do people skate on it? Cole grinned. They used to, before the world got busy. Maya looked up at him. Maybe it should get unbusy again. Inside the house, Elena was given the master bedroom on the first floor, while Maya's room was filled with donated books, art supplies, and a telescope that Cole had custom built by one of his teams 3 years ago and never used. That night, while Maya was asleep and the house hummed with quiet, Cole stepped into his study and closed the door. Olivia was waiting on video, her face serious. We finished the forensic audit. It's bad, Cole. Voss didn't just frame Elena. He rerouted over $5 million through a shell company under his wife's name. And that's just what we found in the first pass. Cole's jaw tightened. Go public. Olivia hesitated. Are you sure? This will start a war. Investors. Board. He looked past her image to the picture Maya had drawn earlier that day, taped to the edge of his desk. A house in the clouds, a woman and a girl standing beside a tall man with a paper heart in his hands, I'm sure. The next morning, he issued a formal internal memo to all board members. Effective immediately, an external investigation would be conducted into the original audit from 7 years ago. Voss was suspended. Press inquiries would be handled by the legal team. The company's share price dipped within hours. Headlines bloomed across every financial site. Harrington CEO reopens cold case, high-ranking exec under scrutiny. Cole didn't flinch. He focused on breakfast, on helping Maya with her eggs, on warming Elena's tea, on laying down new rituals in a house that had known only echoes for so long. But the outside world did not stay outside for long. 3 days later, while Maya and Elena were in the garden, Voss arrived at the estate. He didn't come through the front gate. He came through the service entrance escorted by a former head of security who had remained loyal to him. Cole met him on the back terrace dressed in jeans and a sweatshirt, not expecting a confrontation. Voss didn't waste time. You're making a mistake. Cole's voice was ice. The mistake was trusting you. Voss stepped closer. You think she's a saint. That woman cost you millions in contracts. I cleaned it up. I kept your hands clean. Cole stood his ground. You forged signatures. You stole funds. You destroyed a woman's life to pad your own. And you did it under my roof. Voss laughed bitterly. You're still so naive. You think virtue buys loyalty. It doesn't. Power does. Fear does. And right now, the only thing you're doing is giving every investor a reason to doubt you. You'll sink this company for a girl and a mistake you made a decade ago. Cole's voice dropped. She's not a mistake, and that girl is the only reason I still believe I can build something worth saving. Voss took a step back, shook his head. Then you've already lost. He turned and walked away. Cole didn't stop him. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low behind the trees, and Maya lay on the living room rug drawing a bridge between stars, Elena sat beside Cole on the couch. You look like you saw a ghost. I saw the man I used to be, and I told him he's not welcome here anymore. Elena placed her hand on his. Then maybe we can finally start over. He turned toward her. No more hiding. No more waiting. I want this, all of it, even if it means rebuilding everything from scratch. Elena smiled. You won't have to do it alone this time. Cole looked down at Maya, who had just finished drawing 3 people crossing that star bridge, hand in hand. And for the first time in years, he believed her. They would not rebuild what was lost. They would build something entirely new, together, from the ruins of betrayal, from the ashes of guilt, from the flicker of hope found in a child's voice asking, "Where can I buy a heart for my mom?" 2 weeks later, the headlines had stopped being just noise. They had turned into fuel. Cole sat in a small glass conference room inside Harrington Medical's headquarters, across from 6 board members who wore tailored suits and stiff expressions as if pressed and polished straight from the machine of corporate immunity. Outside the windows, the city blinked with its usual indifference, but inside that room, everything was tense and coiled. Olivia sat beside Cole, her laptop open, her tone sharp but composed. The forensic team has confirmed that over the course of 5 fiscal quarters, Graham Voss directed funds into a subsidiary account under false authorization, framing Miss Elena Rivera in the process. The silence was so thick you could almost taste it. One board member, a balding man with rimless glasses named Franklin, cleared his throat. Why didn't our internal compliance team catch this? Cole looked directly at him. Because Voss was the compliance team, or at least he placed his people in every position that mattered. We trusted him for too long. Another woman, Renata Chu, leaned forward, her pen tapping rhythmically against her notepad. This is going to be difficult to clean up. The press already believes the company covered this up for years. Our reputation is at stake. Cole didn't blink. So is our integrity. If we don't confront this openly, we're no better than him. Renata's gaze sharpened. So what's your proposal, Cole? A full public confession? A redemption arc? Is that the plan? He leaned forward. No. The plan is to build something that can survive the truth. Because the alternative is building on a lie, and I've done that before. I won't do it again. Olivia passed a document to each member. Here's our recovery plan. A restructured leadership team. A new transparency portal that opens our budgeting and ethical review processes. And a formal apology to Miss Rivera along with restitution. Franklin frowned. How much restitution? Olivia answered without hesitation. The equivalent of her lost wages plus damages for defamation, legal fees, and child support. Cole added, she raised Maya alone because of what we did to her. It's not a gift, it's accountability. The room went quiet again, but this time something shifted. A breath, a crack. Renata sighed and set down her pen. This isn't going to win you points with our more traditional investors. Cole stood. I'm not trying to win points. I'm trying to clean the blood off this company's hands. You can either be part of that or stand in its way. But I'm not stepping down. Not now. Not ever. As the board adjourned, Olivia looked over at him and gave the faintest smile. You're making enemies fast. He met her eyes. Then I'm finally doing something right. That evening back at the Harrington estate, the lights in Maya's room glowed soft and golden. Cole stepped inside quietly and found her asleep, curled beside a pile of pillows with her sketchbook still open across her knees. He walked over gently and lifted the book, glancing at the newest drawing. This one was different. A courtroom with a little girl standing between 2 adults and a large sun in the corner, with the word family written in blocky letters across its rays. He exhaled and tucked the book under her arm before pulling the blanket over her. Then he turned and found Elena standing in the doorway, watching him with a softness he wasn't sure he deserved. You're good at this, she said quietly. He chuckled. At what? At showing up. She stepped inside and sat on the edge of the bed, brushing Maya's hair off her forehead. She had another episode today, short, but it scared her. He sat beside her. What kind of episode? Her breath caught while playing. Sharp pain. A few seconds of confusion. She said her heart felt tight. Cole's expression darkened. I'll call her cardiologist first thing in the morning. Elena nodded. I just wish I could do more. I hate seeing her afraid. He looked at her. You've already done more than anyone else ever would have. You protected her, even when the world threw you away. She glanced at him, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. And now what? Now that the truth is coming out, what happens to us? He was quiet for a moment, then he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. A pendant, worn, brass, the kind with a little hinge that opened up. He handed it to her. She opened it and saw a picture of her and Maya taken on the beach 7 years ago. She looked up at him confused. "I found this in your old desk drawer at headquarters. I've carried it every day since Zurich, because I don't want to forget again. Not what matters, not who matters." Her voice cracked. "Cole." He shook his head gently. "I know we're not perfect, and I know I hurt you, but I want to try, not because of guilt, not because I think it will fix everything, but because I love you, and I want to be a father to her, even if I wasn't there in the beginning." Elena's eyes filled. She looked down at Maya, sleeping so peacefully, and then back at him. "Then we try. Together." Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, but inside something settled. Not peace exactly, but promise. The next morning, Cole kept his word. He called the cardiologist. They arranged a full workup. Maya underwent a battery of tests, each one supervised by specialists Cole had personally vetted. He sat with her during the scans, held her hand when she flinched, and told her stories about the stars while she waited for needles that she was too brave to fear. At the end of the week, they gathered in the doctor's office. The man behind the desk wore an unreadable expression, his hands folded. "Maya's heart is strong, but there are signs of a congenital rhythm anomaly. It's rare, manageable, but it explains the pain and breathlessness." Elena's fingers clutched Cole's. "What do we do?" The doctor continued. "She'll need minor corrective surgery, a specialized pacemaker. It's not life-threatening now, but if untreated, it could cause serious complications within the next few years." Cole nodded. "Schedule it, whatever it takes." Elena turned to him, her voice trembling. "Thank you." He looked at her. "No, thank you. For letting me be here for this. For all of it." After the appointment, they walked outside into the parking lot. Maya ran ahead toward the car, spinning in the wind like a paper kite. Elena looked at Cole. "You know I used to dream about this. Not just being safe, but being seen, believed, loved without terms." He slipped his hand into hers. "Then let's stop dreaming. Let's build it instead." And as they drove home under a sky that was finally clearing, Maya hummed in the back seat, and the two adults up front shared a look that said what words couldn't. That this was just the beginning. That maybe broken things could be mended. That maybe a man who once lost his soul in boardrooms and betrayal had found it again in the voice of a little girl, asking where to buy a heart, and in the quiet strength of a woman who refused to be erased. 3 months passed. The morning of Maya's surgery arrived with the kind of quiet that makes the world feel paused. The hospital hallway was dimly lit and unusually silent as Cole walked beside Elena and Maya toward the pre-op room. Maya clutched a small stuffed giraffe in one hand and held onto Cole's pinky with the other, her eyes wide but calm. She had asked one question when she woke up that morning. "Will it hurt?" Elena had knelt beside her and said, "Only a little, but you'll be sleeping the whole time." Cole had added, "And when you wake up, we'll be right there, every second." Maya had nodded, brave as ever. Now she wore a thin cotton gown patterned with cartoon stars, and her hair was tied back with a blue ribbon that matched her eyes. A nurse greeted them at the door, soft-spoken and gentle. "Just a few more minutes and we'll be ready," she said. Maya looked up at Cole. "Will you stay here?" He crouched down and looked her in the eye. "I'm not going anywhere. Ever. You're my entire universe, Maya." She smiled, but her lip trembled. "Promise." He kissed her forehead. "I promise." As the nurse gently led Maya into the prep room, Elena leaned into Cole's chest, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. "I hate this. I hate this so much." He held her close. "I know, but she's strong, like you. She's going to be fine. I made sure she has the best team in the country." Elena pulled back just slightly enough to look at him. "You're not the same man who stood behind a glass wall all those years ago and let me take the fall." He nodded. "No. That man was blind. This man would tear down every wall just to hold your hand." She closed her eyes and whispered, Thank you. They waited in silence until the nurse returned and said the team was ready. Cole and Elena stood outside the observation bay while Maya was wheeled in. The room was bright and clinical, filled with machines that blinked and beeped like mechanical lullabies. Cole had made sure the device being implanted was one of Harrington Medical's newest models, one he had personally greenlit for final testing months earlier. Now, it would keep his daughter's heart steady. The surgery lasted just under 2 hours. When the lead surgeon stepped into the waiting room and smiled, Elena collapsed into tears. She's okay. It went perfectly, the doctor said. No complications. We'll monitor her closely, but she's a fighter. You'll be able to see her soon. Cole didn't cry, but something broke quietly inside him, something rigid and frozen that finally thawed. Later, when they were allowed into recovery, Maya was still groggy but conscious. Her eyes fluttered open when she heard their voices. "Hey," she whispered. Elena kissed her cheek. "Hey, baby, you did amazing." Cole sat beside the bed and gently held her hand. "I told you we'd be right here." She gave a weak smile. "Did they fix my heart?" He smiled back. "They did, but your heart was never the problem, Maya. It's always been the strongest thing in the world." Days passed in a gentle rhythm. Maya's recovery was smooth, and Cole stayed at the hospital the entire time, canceling meetings, declining calls and answering only when it concerned Maya or Elena. On the third night, he wheeled in a tray with 3 milkshakes, vanilla, strawberry, and chocolate. Maya perked up. "Did you bring all 3? Cole nodded. "I couldn't remember your favorite." She grinned. "Chocolate." He handed her the glass and looked at Elena. "Strawberry." She raised an eyebrow. "Lucky guess." "No," he said, smiling. "I remember things now." When Maya was discharged, the hospital staff clapped as she left in a wheelchair covered in glittery stickers. Cole arranged for a car seat upgrade and handpicked a team of nurses to assist at home, but Elena gently declined. "I've taken care of her for years, Cole. I think we've got this." He respected that, though he insisted on staying close. Their days at home became a blend of soft mornings, long walks, and whispered conversations once Maya went to sleep. Cole learned to cook pancakes without burning them, and Elena taught him how to braid Maya's hair on Sundays. The walls of the Harrington estate, once cold and minimalist, were slowly covered with art and crayon drawings. Maya's voice echoed through the halls, and laughter, once foreign to that house, became its heartbeat. One night, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Cole stood outside on the patio watching fireflies flicker like tiny lanterns. Elena joined him, a mug of tea in her hands. "You know, this house used to feel like a hotel lobby." "Pretty, but empty." He smiled faintly. "Now it feels like home." She touched his arm. "Because you let it." He turned to her. "I want to make this official. I want to be her legal guardian, not to replace you, never, but to stand beside you as her father." Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "She already sees you that way, Cole. But yes, let's do it." The process moved quickly. Cole hired the best family law attorney not to overpower the process, but to guide it with integrity. They filed joint guardianship papers, and Elena's name remained first on every form. When the judge asked Maya if she wanted Cole to be her official father, she looked up and said, "He already is." The room filled with warmth. The judge smiled and said, "Then so be it." Cole signed the final papers with a steady hand. Outside the courthouse, Elena took his hand. So what now? He looked at her, the woman who had once been erased by his silence. "We build a future." That night, Cole held a press conference. He stood alone behind a podium with the Harrington logo behind him. Cameras flashed. Reporters murmured, but his voice was steady. "Years ago, this company failed a woman named Elena Rivera. We accused her without proof. We erased her. And in doing so, we abandoned a child who should have grown up safe and protected. That child is my daughter. Her name is Maya, and she is the reason I am standing here today. I have stepped down as CEO of Harrington Medical. Effective immediately, our leadership will transition to Olivia Park, whose integrity and clarity brought this truth to light. I will stay on as Chief of Vision and Ethics, overseeing the launch of a new initiative called the Rivera Foundation. It will fund heart surgeries for children across the country and offer legal support to women wrongfully accused in corporate settings. This is not an apology. This is the beginning of reparation. After the conference, Cole walked off stage and found Elena and Maya waiting in the wings. He knelt beside Maya and whispered, "I meant every word." She beamed. "I know." The next morning, Maya drew a picture of the three of them holding hands beneath a banner that read, "Team Heart." She taped it to Cole's office door right beside his old company plaque. He didn't take it down. In fact, he framed it. Because some legacies are built not on stock prices or press releases, but on the quiet decisions to do better, to show up, and to never let go of the people who bring you home. If this story touched your heart, don't leave just yet. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories reach. And if you believe that redemption, second chances, and quiet love can change everything, then subscribe, because the next story might be the one you never knew you needed.